Right, so I had finished listening to Keanu Reeves Does Not Love You, and I was going to take a little bit of a break from audiobooks because it does mean that I have to listen to them quite diligently and finish them in the time and stuff, and it can be a little bit stressful. Also, none of my books that were on my waitlist were ready, so it was okay, bit of a break. But then I'm one of a very large percentage of women over the age of 30 with fibroids. So I actually had to go in for fibroid removal surgery. And this is, again, me having to go to the hospital that's an hour away by bus. And as I've said before, I get horrible motion sickness. So the only thing I can do is literally pop music and listen to music or listen to an audiobook. So I was fine, I will listen to an audiobook. So I didn't think about actually finding one until literally the day of my surgery, because I was busy prepping my surgery and stuff. And then in the half hour before I had to go to the bus, I was crap. And then, as I've spoken before, it's quite hard to find something to listen to because it's all romantasy or not good thrillers. So unless you know you're looking for a book and they have it, it's kind of hard. So I was wait. I did want to do a thing where I, read more classical novels. So I was they'll have classics, right? And I was then looking for classical novels. The first thing I came up was Pride and Prejudice. I was under, time constraints. I was you know what, fine, I'll read it. I would probably read it at some point anyway, because while I have seen the movie with Colin Firth, who I think was a brilliant Mr. Darcy, and seen adaptations Pride and Prejudice versus Zombies, I haven't actually ever read the book. So I started listening to it now. Because I've been wanting to read more classics anyway, and I didn't want to waste more time trying to find a different classic, maybe, like Heathcliff or whatever. And I was oh, I'd probably read it anyway, and it's a nice one to read. And yeah, so I've started listening to it. It's 12 hours of an audiobook, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through it, even in with an extension on my Libby. I might have to borrow it again in a couple of months or something. But yes, I'm listening to it. So far it's all very familiar to me from the films. Yeah, and I'll let you know how I get on. Baby, you're so sweet like honey. Baby, right. So I'm about 65% of the way through Pride and Prejudice. Sorry about the shaky camera. They're just horrible people. I feel I'm reading the Persians again, just in old-timey England. I don't understand why people love this book so much. I am not enjoying it. Stay tuned for my final update. I have finished it, Pride and Prejudice. As I've said before, and I said in my video at the beginning of the year, I was really interested in reading more classics. It's partially because I went to school in Germany, so we read German classics, so I'm not very exposed, or haven't been very exposed to British classics. And then obviously I kind of needed to quickly find something to listen to while I was on the bus for an hour, 2 hours. So I picked Pride and Prejudice because that was an easy one to pick. And obviously I did my halfway through. I obviously knew the story very well. I've seen the films. I realized also how much Bridget Jones is actually Pride and Prejudice in a way. Certainly at the start. It then made me want to watch Bridget Jones. Because every time I watch Bridget Jones, I kind of identify with her a bit more. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I found Pride and Prejudice very hard. So obviously, overall, it's about the Bennet family. The Bennet family has 5 daughters. I've got a lovely little thing because it will help. Yes, they have 5 daughters, no sons. And it's all about, obviously, their daughters wanting to get married. It's sort of in the 1800s. And it's essentially like a romance, I suppose, but also like a novel about posh people in those times. It's kind of made out that the Bennets aren't very wealthy, and they're certainly not as wealthy as some of the other characters in the story. But they are pretty darn wealthy. Like, they have servants, etc. So they're fine. And maybe I just, honestly, my friend said it before, maybe you just don't like reading about rich people. And maybe I don't, because I didn't enjoy this very much. For most of the book, it was a 2, which is like just a smidgen above a 1, basically. I was like, they're just all horrible people. And Pride and Prejudice obviously comes, supposedly, because so it's got the Bennet family, blah blah blah, and they're wanting to marry off their daughters, and then it relates them meeting different men, Mr. Bingley, Mr. Wickham, and Mr. Darcy, and romantic. The main story of the book is the love story between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. I don't think that's a spoiler. And Pride and Prejudice technically relates to the pride that Mr. Darcy feels, because essentially initially they don't get on, but then they both realize that they were both kind of pretentious pricks. Sorry. And then they fall in love. And then Prejudice is basically the prejudice Elizabeth holds against Darcy, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know, but they do both hold both. They're both Pride and Prejudice people. Horrible. Just everybody in this book is quite horrible. Like I said, I didn't enjoy it very much. It was just kind of about them kind of not being that wealthy, but then they are very wealthy, and about them all getting married, and it felt sometimes quite stereotypical, quite like a lot of the characters felt like caricatures to me. They didn't feel very well developed. And I didn't like the 2 main characters, Elizabeth and Darcy. I thought they were both pretentious pricks. There were also weird things, and maybe that's because it's a classic and it's oldie-woldy times, but like characters kept referring to their lovers by their last name. So like Elizabeth would call Mr. Darcy, and not... He has a very funny first name. I can't remember it now. But like, and Elizabeth's mother would refer to her husband as Mr. Bennet. And I was like, that's just weird. Also, they would call each other, like there is a character, Mr. Gardner, and she would refer to both Mr. and Mrs. Gardner as brother and sister. And I was like, okay, wait, is this some sort of Alabama style family setup? Sorry, Alabama. I'm just dipping into those jokes. Or is it, or are they just like, I just got confused, and like, at one point they talk about blah 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 visiting their niece, but actually they're referring to Elizabeth, and I'm like, just say Elizabeth, like you're making it, like my brain a lot of times went, who are we talking about? Like, it was just really difficult. It also kept changing perspectives. Like there wasn't like an overwhelming narrator. It more felt like everybody was narrating their own little parts, but it wasn't purposefully done, like in changing all sorts. It just felt very awkward. I listened to it on audiobook, I should say. I did put it up to 1.5 speed, which I've never done before, but I was like, I need to get through this, because at one point I did almost DNF this book. But let's talk a bit more about it. So, like I said, they all suck. Let's start with Mr. Bennet. And I've got my lovely little chart, because there's a lot of people to keep track of. So, Mr. Bennet is here, is married to Mrs. Bennet, and they have 5 daughters. Now, Mr. Bennet very much just likes sitting in his library and not doing shit. Certainly not engaging with his wife or his daughters, except for Lizzie, because he really favors Lizzie, which comes out very early in the book, and I was like, what a dick. It's like, don't favor you. Like, it's normal that maybe you have a kid that you relate more to, but it's like, he literally does not give a shit about any of his other kids, except for her and maybe Jane a little bit. So yeah, Jane is the eldest, and then Elizabeth, and then Mary, and then Kitty, and then Lydia. So then so Jane and Elizabeth are very much portrayed as like the proper daughters, the good daughters, whereas Lydia certainly is portrayed more as a wild child, and influencing her other sister Kitty. And Mary likes books, so she's pretentious, and men don't like her because she thinks she's better than them, apparently. But again, I don't know anything about Mary aside from the fact that she likes books. Like, I've not seen any evidence of the fact that supposedly she thinks she's better than everybody else. I have seen a lot of evidence, though, that Elizabeth thinks she's better than everybody else, but let's not talk about that, right? So yeah, that's Mr. Bennet. He also doesn't really like doing things for someone he doesn't want to. Like, obviously, they need to marry their daughters off, and he kind of does the bare minimum for it, but he doesn't really give a shit. Whereas his wife, Mrs. Bennet, her, I like how she's drawn very horribly. She's a bit of a gossipy bitch, okay? Yeah, let's not pretend. Like, she is a bit awful. Like, she totally is. She's very materialistic. She's like all about wanting to marry her daughters off. She's all about like money, and wanting to be fabulous and fame. Like, she'd be a Kardashian in these times, right? She's all about like, you know, who's with who sort of thing. Then Darcy. Oh, and I should mention, so Mr. Bennet and Mr. Collins. Yes. I can't read it other way around. Basically, they're sort of cousins, I believe. And basically, because Mr. Bennet doesn't have a son to pass his house and estate to, some legal thing exists that says Mr. Collins will get it. And that's a kind of background as well. But Mr. Collins actually is trying to be nice about it and actually offers to marry one of these daughters so that they can stay in the estate. So he proposes to Elizabeth at one point, but she says, no. Because everybody thinks he's boring. Which, yes, he is. He's quite boring. He likes droning on, but it's not his fault he's boring. But as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Collins can go and die. But that's more because of what he does later on in the book. But initially, he's just a bit boring. And I'm like, so what? Not everybody can be as fabulous as Elizabeth Bennet. Anyways, so yeah. And then there is Mr. Darcy. No, here. Mr. Darcy. So Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley are friends, and they essentially, Mr. Bingley buys an estate near Longbourn, which is where the Bennets live, and him and his sisters, Caroline Bingley and somebody Hurst, she doesn't really get mentioned in the book, essentially are on the estate, and they get to know the Bennets and the daughters, and then there's like a bit of a liaison between Charles Bingley and Jane, because they're both probably the nicest people in the book, although Jane doesn't really have a personality aside from, I'm sure he's a nice man. Yes. And Darcy, essentially, the first time you meet him, is very prideful. Where is he there? He's very prideful. He's very much like, I'm better than everyone, and kind of tells Lizzie that she ain't pretty enough for him. What a dick. I had a moment of like, is he an introvert? And then I was like, no, he's just a dick. But actually, I do think he's socially a bit awkward, which I'll come to later. Lizzie, main character, feels like she's better than the rest of her rotten family, aside from maybe Jane, who she kind of likes, but she's a bit simple. Like, she's just too nice. But basically, like, I get it. Like, your family is a bit eccentric, right? But, like, it's your family. Like, she's very like, oh, somebody come take me away from these people. Initially, there's a lot of talk about how smart Lizzie is and how independent and stuff. But you don't really see any of that, except for that one time when she walked to Neverfield, if I don't get it right, but Neverfield, which is like the mansion at Bingley board, and essentially arrived very muddy. But aside from that, like, you don't really get it. People talk about it, but you don't see it. So it's like, and like I said, her sisters and side characters don't really have a character, but they just seem like caricatures and quite grating. And that's sort of the book. I won't say if they find each other and love it. I already did. Anyways. I did almost DNF it. There was a part which is also when Lizzie walks to Neverfield, where essentially Jane gets ill and stays at Neverfield. And that part dragged on for about what felt like 10 chapters. Every chapter was just like, Jane still felt very ill. Elizabeth attended the breakfast with the others. She left, and then the others talked about how unsuitable a woman she is. And I was like, so I almost DNF'd it, but I got through it. But Jesus. No wonder that it could be made easily into a film, because you can cut a lot of that shit out. Anyways, I'm gonna go more into the actual story now. So if you don't want to hear the actual story, don't stay. But I mean, like I said, it's pretty well known. So like I said, Jane falls in love with Mr. Bingley. Where is she? There and there, I think. And then Mrs. Bingley is very much interested in becoming Mrs. Darcy. And it's like talking a lot about how good she gets on with Darcy's sister, Georgiana. Yes. Like I said, Mr. Collins there offers to marry Elizabeth. Elizabeth goes, oh, fuck no. And then a day later, he essentially asks Charlotte Lucas, who is basically, they're like neighbors of the Bennets, and Charlotte is Liz's best friend. And basically she was like taking a lot of Mr. Collins's droning on and on and on for Elizabeth, so she wouldn't have to deal with it, but also kind of made a pretty clever ploy to get him to want to marry her, because she's apparently not handsome. And she's also kind of past her wedding age, and she knows that she's not very likely gonna find a husband. So she was like, he's pretty rich, you know, and let me make my play. And he does propose to her and marries her pretty quickly. He does propose to her literally a day or two after he proposed to Lizzie, which is a bit strange. But yeah, so then he marries Charlotte and they go and live. And it was quite funny, because there was a lot of Lizzie being like, oh my god, how can you? And it's funny because she didn't want him, but it was a bit like, how dare you? And it was a bit of like, oh my god, why would you do that? Like, oh, and like, you're not at all who I thought you were. And I was like, well, you weren't very good friends if you didn't know that your best friend was like manipulative like that. Anyways, that was actually one of the most interesting things, and it's not discussed at all. I wish I had known more about like Charlotte's little ploy for Mr. Collins, and like the calculative calculated nature of her going for him, because she knew she was not gonna find a husband otherwise. Anyways, Elizabeth is actually a lot like her mother. Like, she wouldn't like it to be like that, but she is. Like, she thinks herself better than everyone, and she thinks that the world should revolve around her. She dislikes most people. So her and her mother actually have a very similar opinion. Like, her mother believes that everybody is only in connection with them, really, to, like, get something from them. And Elizabeth is very much the same. There is a bit later on where, like, the Lucases are, like, and maybe they are, but I see no evidence of that, but, like, they're supporting her mother through a hard time, and her mother is very much like, they're just doing it because they want to get, like, the gossip. And Elizabeth is very much along the same lines. So she's a lot like her mother. But basically, Mr. Darcy, he's like a dick. He believes women need to act the proper way, and he really dislikes Mrs. Bennet and the younger sisters of the Bennet clan. He thinks they are not proper. And he also didn't believe that Jane and Bingley were, like, he did believe Bingley was in love with Jane, but apparently he has a lot of women that he's interested in. But he didn't think Jane felt the same way, so he actually intervened, and this is a big plot point, to kind of take Bingley away from Jane's influence, take him back to London, because also he felt that the family wasn't the right kind of family to marry into, that sort of thing. And he basically took him away, and later on, like, Elizabeth finds that out. Somebody I haven't mentioned yet is Mrs. Lady Catherine de Bourgh, this woman here. So she's some sort of lady that Mr. Collins works for or is affiliated with in some way, don't ask me what. But he, like, gushes about her, like, every other word out of his mouth. It's like, Catherine de Bourgh, Lady Catherine, believes, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my god, they're totally boning. But essentially, she reminds me, if you've ever seen the Gilmore Girls, she reminds me of the third Lorelai, the original Lorelai Gilmore, who's all very much, and I think she was totally an inspiration for the actress who played the third Lorelai. Like, Catherine de Bourgh was totally an inspiration with the way she acts. She's so rich. She's so privileged. She cannot believe that anybody would not live the way she does, with, like, all the servants and, like, all the money and the way that she likes to live. And she's a cunt, but she's, like, very funny. She's very outrageous. I felt the same way about the third Lorelai. I was like, oh my god, she's, like, horrible in a way, but she's also very funny. Anyways. Yeah, like I said, Elizabeth is pretty much just as bad as Mr. Darcy, because she feels exactly the same way about her family. She thinks, nah, get me away from them. So I don't know why these two crazy crees didn't make it sooner. Anyways. There is a guy called Wickham, who's the only guy that's, like, on his own, but he kind of has a relation to Darcy, because Darcy's father knew Wickham's father and, like, kind of raised him almost like a son, and liked him a lot, but apparently Wickham is, like, a horrible individual. Essentially Hugh Grant in the Bridget Jones movie. And Mr. Darcy, and at one point he was tried to marry Georgiana, probably just to get the money, right? But Mr. Darcy prevented that. But now he's come to where the Bennet family is. Elizabeth very much falls for Wickham. She thinks he's very super handsome, Hugh Grant, basically. But then is told how Mr. Darcy essentially is really shitty to Mr. Wickham, and is then like, oh, how dare he, blah, 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 blah. And throughout all those balls and engagements, whatever, Mr. Darcy realizes that he actually really likes Elizabeth, and proposes to her in the most awkward manner. And she goes, fuck no, I hate you, dude. He's very upset, and she kind of talks to him about, like, the fact that he, you know, took Jane, like, stole Jane's happiness with Mr. Bingley and has been very unfair to Mr. Wickham. So he leaves, but then writes her a letter where he explains to her what happened with Georgiana and that Mr. Wickham is not a very good person, and also that he didn't think that Jane actually liked Mr. Bingley all that much, which then, like, starts changing Elizabeth's feelings for him. Let me grab some water. Just realized that there's, like, a weird light thing here. Anyways. Right, what was I talking about? Yeah. So there is one. I don't like Mr. Bennet really, but he's not the worst character, and he does say something that I thought was hilarious, so I did actually write it down. Because, basically, it's all about, like, around the time that Darcy asked Elizabeth to marry him, but it's also, like, he basically tells her that he shouldn't want to marry her because her family is completely improper and blah, 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 blah. And, Mr. Bennet talks to Elizabeth, doesn't know what happened, but just knows that something happened and that maybe somebody didn't think his family was worthy, and he goes, "Such squeamish youths as cannot bear to be associated with a little absurdity are not worthy of regret." And I was like, I like that. Like, he was very much like, if they can't deal with a little bit of, like, extravagance and absurdity, then fuck them, right? And I like that. But yeah, I mean, Elizabeth and Darcy are actually so much alike. I mean, they both hate her family. And they're both extremely, like, they both think they're better than everybody. But essentially, like, it changes her feelings. The letter kind of changes her feelings. She then ends up having a stay with... Where are they? Where are they? Oh, there they are. Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, who are essentially related to Mrs. Bennet, and who are essentially not as, like, posh. Essentially, there's a moment where Elizabeth goes, oh, you know, she goes and visits Darcy's estate and goes, oh my god, it's so amazing. I could live here if I'd accepted his proposal. And I was like, you're a bit more like your mother than you thought. And then she also goes that her aunt and uncle could never meet them or never, like, visit them though. And I'm like, why? Because they are not, like, posh enough? But apparently they actually have a lot more money than the Bennets because they're, like, business people. Anyways, but as it turns out, Darcy comes back, they meet, and he actually ends up spending time with Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, and actually really likes them. Let me see. Oh yeah, when they go visit his house, the servant, like, talks about how amazing Mr. Darcy is, and Elizabeth immediately goes, oh my god, I was totally wrong about him. And I'm like, because his servant that he pays and that's been taking care of him since he was a baby thinks that he's a great guy? I don't think so. Anyways. Yeah, so they spend time together, but then she receives a letter and finds out that Lydia has run away with Mr. Wickham. So essentially, Lydia basically is always kind of thrown herself at men. I wonder why. Maybe it's because everybody's telling her that she needs to get married. And those are my issues with women back then. Anyways, so Lydia has been, like, enamored by Mr. Wickham. They've run away together. Initially, everybody thought to get married, but then it was like, oh no, wait. They didn't get married, and then everybody's like, they need to get married, and I'm like, why? Like when Georgiana was gonna marry Wickham, everybody was like, do not marry him, and now they won't. Anyways, I guess it's something to do with it being proper, because if it was just her living with a man, that wouldn't be proper. Anyways. Yeah. Oh, I forgot what to say about that. Like, just take in, Elizabeth said no to Darcy's proposal. Literally said, fuck no, don't care about you, hate you. But then he keeps like inviting them while him and the gardeners and Elizabeth are there, so that they have to spend, because it's not proper to decline, right? So they have to keep spending time with him, and I'm just like, dude, she said no, take the L, leave it. Anyways. She then gets those letters. Oh yeah, she gets like 2 letters, but for some reason the way it's written, it reads like there's 3 or 4 letters. But anyways, so she finds out that Lydia ran away with Wickham, and then gets like her father goes after them. Then Mr. Gardner goes after them, trying to find Lydia and trying to get Wickham to marry Lydia. Elizabeth goes home. And this is when Mrs. Lucas kind of is supporting her mother, because her mother is like completely, she doesn't leave her bed, sort of thing. And then they find out that Wickham has agreed to marry Lydia. They have been married. They come home. Everything is cool. They get a letter from Mr. Collins, who obviously heard about all of it. And says that it would be better if Lydia was dead and they should reject and abandon her. And that's when I was like, yeah, no, you can go and die. Bye. They believe that Mr. Gardner essentially had to pay, because Wickham had lots of debts with the gambling debts. So they believe that Mr. Gardner had to pay all of those debts off and offer him more to get him to marry Lydia, and her mother literally does not care about that, and she's just like, my daughter is married at 16, and I was like, ew, married to a dude that's grown. PDF file. Throughout, they very much still act like Wickham is fine, like even like Mr. Bennet is like, I quite like Mr. Wickham. And I'm like, you mean the dude that like got your daughter into massive issues and that had massive gambling debts? That dude is fine with you? But they act like Lydia is the one that has the problem. But again, that's probably more of an issue with me and the way women were treated back then. However, but Bingley comes back to Neverfield, and they spend a lot of time with Jane and Elizabeth, and around this time Elizabeth also finds out that actually Mr. Darcy was instrumental in finding her sister and in getting Wickham to marry him, and he's actually the one that paid all that money. God, he rich, why shouldn't he? But obviously they have history as well, so essentially he went there and sorted it all out. After Elizabeth told him, because when she got the letter he was with her, what had happened, he went and sorted it all out. And that kind of makes Lizzie then properly fall for him and go, oh my god, that man is amazing. Which, let's face it, that was pretty amazing. Also, like, if, like, when Lizzie saw Bingley again, like, it was all very like, it was being very nice, like, sorry, you like your sister so much, it's like your best friend, and you know how much it's been hurting her, how Mr. Bingley treated her. Why not throw all your manners out of the window and tell him that she likes him that much, so that she can be happy? Anyways, Lizzie wouldn't do that. She's not kind. Anyways, Bingley and Jane spend time, do eventually basically reunite, and Darcy also basically told Bingley that he was wrong and what he had done in like trying to remove Bingley from Jane, and Bingley and Jane agree to marry. Catherine de Bourgh shows up one last time and is essentially saying to Elizabeth, don't do tell me that my nephew is not going to marry you, because I hear he wants to marry you. This is my best posh English accent. And Elizabeth's very like, I don't know, maybe. And then she goes and also talks to Darcy, and when she does that, and she tells him that Elizabeth refused to say no, he got hope that maybe she did still like him. So then he comes back and speaks to her again. And then Lizzie thanks him for what he's done for Lydia. And then Darcy tells her, essentially, asks her if she still feels the same way. And she says, no. And then they agree to marry. And then they marry, and then everything is fine. Yeah, and that's it. And ultimately, I have to say, so the reason the book went from a 2 to a 3 was because, you know, what happened with Lydia and Wickham and what Darcy did for her was actually very noble and very cute. It's very Bridget Jones, right, when he helps her and stuff. And it feels to me like Mr. Darcy is a man. He essentially also, when he then speaks to Elizabeth about it, talks about the fact that the way he was brought up was to be very prideful, was to believe himself he's better than everybody, was to like also made him socially quite awkward. And those are his faults, but that also Elizabeth made him realize that he wasn't wrong with a lot of what he thought and felt, and he essentially betters himself and he becomes a better person. Lizzie doesn't. Lizzie still thinks she's the best thing since sliced bread. So I actually think Darcy's now too good for her, and he shouldn't have married that girl. It's very funny because when I chatted to my mate at work about it, which she knew she loves Prejudice, and then I told her I didn't like it, and then we were chatting about it when I finished it, and I said, except for the pride, I have realized that I probably am married to Mr. Darcy, like a dude that's not into big words, he's never gonna stand there and be like, I love you so much and you're the best thing. That's not the kind of person he is. He's very socially awkward, and he's very much more about actions. Like, you know, my husband is very much about gifts and like bringing me things to show me his love and doing things for me, acts of service, rather than talking to me about or writing me a poem. So yeah, but ultimately Mr. Darcy went from the bottom of the list very much more towards the top of the list, certainly. But Elizabeth is still a pretentious bitch. So yeah. That was Pride and Prejudice. A 3-star read from me. And maybe I'll touch another Jane Austen, maybe I won't. I'll have to see. So yeah.